It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here today to share some time and share some thoughts with people who are trying to think about Islam in a new key, in a way that deals with the challenges. And this morning my talk will be about contemporary challenges to Islamic or Muslim thought. You know, people make the distinction between Islamic and Muslim, and hopefully some of you will want to engage that. But the subtitle involves the question of power, reform, and faith. Now, originally, Dilwar, who has been the person who contacted me about that, asked me to talk about the question of Islamic reform, and I told him, you know, Islamic reform is interesting, and I can talk for days on it, but many Muslims also don't like it. So I have to get into those issues too. So I've got 30 minutes to make my pitch. It's 11:23. Do remind me when my time is up. So the question is in front of us is, what do Muslims need in the 21st century? What are the big challenges? Why am I saying that there are challenges to Muslim thought? The reason I say so is that in different parts of the Muslim world, including those of us living in Europe and North America, we are facing a multitude of challenges. One of those are the challenges of the political. What is the nature of the political in relation to the question of faith? We are believers, we have a responsibility towards God, but we also come from a tradition that is unlike other traditions in which the political was very closely tied up in its early formation with the question of religion. Religion and culture and politics was part of a larger package. We've gone through major transformations in modern history, and one of those major transformations has been the end of empires, the arrival of new kinds of empires, European empires. European empires brought to different parts of the world, through colonialism and imperialism, a different idea of the world, a new cosmos, a new way of understanding human existence, and with it came the idea of modernity, right? And with this question of modernity came science and scientific innovation that basically cancelled out everything Jews, Christians, and Muslims believed about the world and the nature of the cosmos. And that also includes the world of Africans, the African traditional religions, Hindus, and Buddhism, right? So we now have a very different understanding of the world and cosmos and relationships between us and the unknown. So the big question for contemporary Muslims is this issue of what do we need? You know, for the 18th and 19th century in particular, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, many Muslim thinkers like Jamaluddin Afghani, Muhammad Abdu in the Arab Middle East, but people like Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan in India, that was one kind of Islamic reformers who were pushing for a new way, understanding Islam in a new key. But there were also traditional reformers also. People who are extremely orthodox, and they were also thinking about reform. The foundation of the Deoband school in 1867, the rise of, before that in the 18th century, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab that brought about Wahhabism. In India, it was Shah Waliullah, who died in 1762. A number of traditional figures were also thinking about this question of reform and change. What did reform mean in these various, for these various actors? For some, they went back to this idea that the Prophet ﷺ, on whom be peace, said that God will send at the beginning of every 100 years a person who will renew the faith, that will engage in tajdeed. For ultra-traditionalists or for orthodox interpreters of Islam, it meant that you need to go back to the original inspiration and you need to give life and you have to revivify and resuscitate the prophetic sunnah, the prophetic tradition. That's what it meant for traditionalists. In other words, the practices of the Prophet of 7th century Arabia need to become part of the package of revival. And there's the understanding that people over the centuries lose touch with that original inspiration. Now the question there is it literally that tradition, or is that tradition interpreted? That is the big question. For some traditionalists, it meant that you literally have to go back and find that inspiration, and therefore certain strands of Salafism would dress in very different modes for men and women, particular understanding of what is the Sunnah, carrying around a stick in their pockets to brush their, to clean their teeth, using the miswak. That is one version of it, right? A very literal understanding of what that Sunnah is all about. And that believe that gives them a certain kind of authenticity. There are others who believe that actually you need to understand what are the values behind the Sunnah. What are these primary values, and you can bring those values into human life, especially when values get corrupted through political systems, through cultural practices over the centuries. You need to dust off and you need to repackage those values for the world in which you are living. Doesn't mean that you cannot add on to those new values, additional values, reinvent yourself, but that you could do that for some, but you need to keep the original impulse. In other words, you need to have a continuity, and that continuity is the question of tradition. So oftentimes Muslims think of Sunnah as tradition, but in Islam, and Islamic civilization and culture, tradition means more than the Sunnah, more than the verses of the Quran, but it also means the human endeavor. And what Muslims as cultural actors, as social actors, have produced to create successful societies, that's also part of tradition. And tradition, that part of tradition that comes from the Quran and the Sunnah has some kind of a normative hold on you. But there are other kinds of practices that happens through culture, through literature, through music, through performance art, through ways and modes of living. That's also tradition. And that tradition was not missing from day one in the 7th century Arabia. That was not missing. Therefore the Quran came in the Arabic language, that all the performativity and the energy of the Arabic language. It was Arab culture. Then it moved on into the Levant, and moved on into Persia, into Iraq and those territories, into India and westwards later on, and picked up those cultural energies and became part of an Islamic cultural and civilizations that we can say. In other words, if I remember the words of a famous 11th century thinker by the name of Al-Mawardi. Al-Mawardi was a jurist from the Shafi school, but also an ambassador for the Buyids, and an important figure. In his very important book called the etiquette, or the principles of ethics for living in the world, and in fact in questions of faith, in the opening lines he says that in this book of mine, I will combine the verities of the jurists, I will combine the verities, the truth claims that the jurists make, as well as the insight of the litterateurs, the rhetoricians, and also the poets. In other words, you want to bring the humanities and the normative traditions together to give it a whole new inspiration. أجمع في هذا الكتاب بين التحقيق الفقهاء وترقيق الأدباء والبلغاء. And so Mawardi is very careful in trying to, and Mawardi is a very kind of a pioneering thinker, and Mawardi helps us to understand what his world was like. And I take inspiration from people like Mawardi, that those of us who are trying to think through Islam and what an Islamic faith practice must be in the world in which we exist, we need to go back to both the ancient tradition and the modern tradition. Both of them must be part of a certain kind of a synthesis. The challenge always lies in, who does the synthesis and how do we make these syntheses possible. So the first point is that I want to make is that we need to have a new common sense. A new common sense, which is nothing new that I'm saying, other people have said this, but I want to reiterate this idea that of commonsensical understanding to the world. Otherwise, we get embroiled in all kinds of problems. One of the issues that embroil us is the question of the colonial past and the imperial past. Now, of course, colonialism happened. We cannot wish away that colonialism is going to disappear from our memories and we're going to go back to what happened before. That's just not possible. You cannot say, I'm going to go back to the Aristotelian cosmos. That Aristotelian cosmos no longer works. Aristotle had a limited understanding of how he thought of issues in an abstract way, but the empirical world is the world in which we are living. That is the world of science. It is post-Copernicus, it is post-Galileo, it is post-Newton and Einstein, right? That is the world in which we are living. Everything that we use based on a whole new way of understanding what the physical and material world is all about. If you're not going to have those components in your understanding of what is faith, and what is the meaning of faith in the world today, there are going to be many, many contradictions and many, many anachronisms in our faith practice. So one of the issues that we do face is the question of anachronism. In other words, doing things that are out of step with time. And yes, of course, it is so drenching and stirring in many ways, but also wrenching in other ways, that you have to take decisions that are going to make you look very different from the past. Those are some of the hard decisions Muslims have to make. And it is difficult because the hold of tradition is very strong. If you break from tradition, some will say that you have left the faith. And if you break from an interpretation of tradition and adopt another interpretation of tradition, people will say you have left the faith. And therefore there are blasphemy charges that are flying around in different parts of the Muslim world, including North America and Europe, right? Within Muslim communities, well, so-and-so has done something that is kufr, that is unbelief, or so-and-so has done something that is, contrary to the majority consensus, and anybody who goes against the consensus has stepped out of the community, the faith community. So that issue is absolutely critical, that we need to adopt a new common sense, and we need to take seriously the knowledge of the last 300 years. The knowledge development of the last 3 centuries are these knowledge traditions which are largely European in origin, but have global application. There is no different way of making a Muslim jet engine. There is no different Muslim body for medicine, right? These are commonsensical stuff. But yet there's all kinds of cockeyed ideas that people want to do certain kinds of Islamic science and Islamic medicine and those kind of stuff that really are distracting. People feel good that it is something cultural and that they can connect with the history, but some of them are basically just that. They are history, they are edifying things, they give you an idea of where you have come from, but it's not the place that you have to go to. Oftentimes we make a mistake in understanding history. History is a mirror in which you understand where you've come from and what the past was like, but it's not the place that you have to go to. The go-to is a very different place. The modern world's go-to place is an understanding of the future that is unprecedented. The pre-modern world did not have an idea of the future the way we have. This is one of the key ideas of modernity, that modernity talks about the human being as an individual with a particular sensibility, also thinks of community with a particular sensibility. It's not community and individuality like you had in the pre-modern world. In the pre-modern world, an individual was very much an hierarchical one. If you were in an Islamic or Christian empire, the Christian was at the top of it, the free Christian male was at the top, the free Muslim male was at the top. Hierarchical order in which slavery was seen as part of a natural order. There's nothing wrong with slavery in a pre-modern world. In the modern world, we have adopted a very different understanding of what an individual is, what a human being is, that a human being is born free. That's part of let's call it an evolutionary phase, or a political or cultural evolution. I know some people are still writing books about Islam and slavery and trying to apologize for Islamic slavery. I don't know what that is all about, but nevertheless I would be happy to have that conversation. And some are actually saying that no, slavery can never be abolished. Leading Muslim jurists are writing contemporary one, slavery can never be abolished because it is something that has been endorsed by the Quran and the Prophetic Tradition, and who are we to outlaw that? Those are people who call themselves jurists but don't understand jurisprudence, nor do they understand interpretation. I'm sorry to say, and I'm happy to take you on, or take anybody who tries to defend them. I'll be happy to take them on that issue, or at least engage with it. Part of this anachronism is that we have extraordinary and toxic practices in Muslim society. And these toxic practices are also, and most of your experiences, this morning I spoke to some colleagues from based back in South Africa, and people I've met subsequently, who explained to me, the challenges they have in the UK about Muslim women able to go to the mosque. Unable to go to the mosque, or there are all kinds of restrictions, or very few women have a leadership role in the mosque or in the mosque administration. And it's just unacceptable in the 21st century, right? Or Muslim women are relegated to the most awful spaces in mosque settings. Now, there might be some mosques that are excellent facilities, and I think we should celebrate those. But those that are not doing that, or don't even allow women to step into the mosque, those are issues that we have to challenge. They are the issues of sexual and sexual orientation, and the challenges of those kinds of issues that are also part of Muslim communities. These are issues that you can no longer sweep under the carpet. You have to begin addressing those issues, because it could be your child, or your neighbor's child, or everybody else's child, or adults in those communities, and we have to think about those issues in critical ways. So my point is that we have to take seriously knowledge of the last 3 centuries. Part of that is that Muslim religious leadership are quite happy to take seriously the Islamic historical tradition, the normative practices of very, very impressive jurists, thinkers, theologians, literateurs. It's an extraordinary archive. Unfortunately, modern Muslims do not know that history, because what's happening in Muslim societies? Everybody wants to do one of 3 things. Want to become an engineer, or an engineer, or an engineer. Only 3 professions, right? Engineer, engineer, engineer. Or down, you know what I'm trying to see how many of you are awake. The issue is that everybody's going into these kind of natural sciences, and of course we need scientific endeavor. But what has happened is that the understanding of the human being and how the human being breathes and lives over centuries, that knowledge is absent in our mosques, in our Sunday equivalent of Sunday schools, the after school madrasas, or they are also absent in the theological schools where there's Al-Azhar, or in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, or in Indonesia and those places. They're absent. If they are there, they teach you Arabic literature so that you can know these various philological terms, and you can know the Arabic vocabularies. But the literary beauty of Al-Mutanabbi, or the understanding of Ghalib, or the understanding of any kind, that is not part of the interpretive endeavor. It's not part of our thinking and our passions, right? Or for those of us living in the West, we need to understand Shakespeare, you need to understand Milton, you need to understand the literary canons of the West, which is part of our heritage. And I always say, as a Muslim, I'm an heir to 2 literary canons, the Islamic, Arabic, Persian, Urdu one, and also I speak English most of the time, and the European one through English, or those that are translated. That's where our real humanity lies. That's where we understand what human beings are and were, and what human beings could become, right? The absence of those things in our mosque, in our spirituality and so on, these are toxic absences. In the absence of those humanizing things, it is filled with anger and hatred and self-loathing and all kinds of other things, and these kind of, magical thinking that by destroying or killing somebody or doing some act of violence will give some kind of satisfaction, and you've done something for God and His Prophet. I was just told that someone did an act of violence a couple of days ago here. It was not even, it's no longer important. Maybe I missed it in the New York Times. But nevertheless, what I'm saying is that I just want to talk about the violence that is committed by Muslims for all kinds of political and other reasons. Some are understandable, some are not understandable. Never can that be condoned. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that that's not the only thing Muslims are all about. That's not the only thing that British Islamic Conference and New Horizons is all about. It's not only about the questions of violence. Maybe we need to give some attention to that. It's about the vision forward. It's about the vision forward and the things that we need to invest in. I said that, that canon of Muslim literature and history is unavailable. Why? Because no one is studying history. The humanities is unstudied. I've been to universities in Syria, where Syria was still a country, where professors of philosophy share a room 6 to a room. And I was at the University of Cape Town. I had an office that half the size of this hall, right? So what I'm saying is that, thank you. What I'm saying is that the critical issues that we need to think about is to invest in those resources that we need for our own self-survival. In other words, we need to invest in historians and social scientists and humanists who are going to study the Muslim past and bring those resources, because the necessity of that is in order to give ourselves a sense of a living and dynamic tradition. Without that tradition, you are nothing. Everybody is part of a tradition. We're just not body and flesh, but we are also spiritual beings. We're also beings that carry a soul within us. And these souls communicate over time with different generations and history and time in a very, very complicated way, and understanding of which we are only beginning to get to the very beginnings of that understanding. So the point I'm trying to make is that we need to take the past seriously. The past needs to be studied. Unfortunately, tens of thousands and if not millions of documents are lying unstudied in the vaults and archives, in the Topkapi Museum, in libraries and places in Pakistan and India and Egypt and throughout the Muslim world. Some of them are disappearing as we speak because nature takes its role when these things are not preserved, and that means a certain part of humanity's history is also being eliminated, right? So we need to become caretakers. We need to become critical caretakers of the past. We need to become critical caretakers, as my colleague Atalia Omar talks about, critical caretakers of tradition. So we just don't want to be people who are in love with tradition, but we will also engage what I call critical traditionalists. That is, tradition is always part of us, but we need to have a critical engagement with that. Lastly, I want to say that as human beings, authenticity is something that everybody is searching for. We all want to be authentic in one way or the other. In Islam, the idea of authenticity comes with the key question of the creation of the human being, that authenticity is responsibility. Authenticity is responsibility. This very idea that God created human beings and said, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa," that I'm going to place in the world a khalif. A khalif is a steward, and the stewardship is about responsibility. And responsibility just doesn't fall upon you. You might be mandated with responsibility, but responsibility is earned. It is not given. This idea that Muslims believe that they are the best of humanity, khayra ummatin, ukhrijat linnas, that have been placed in the world for human beings, is not an automatic thing that you get. The Quran is very clear that you command to the good and you forbid what is evil. Then you earn the badge of responsibility. In other words, you need to be a moral actor. And you can't be a moral actor because someone in the 8th and 9th century told you so. You need to have knowledge of the 21st century and do moral actions that will be something that is coherent to people in the 21st century. If you do an idea, a practice that is incoherent today, the way ISIS went to go and do, and they want to reinvent slavery, it's abominable, and such individuals should be stopped in one way or the other, right? They went to reinvent slavery, or people want to reinvent forms of segregation between human beings because of gender and so on and so forth. That is no longer possible. And that is immoral today. You cannot say it was immoral in the past because the past is a distant place. And the past has its own rhythms and the way things work. But today you cannot be, and we are not condemning the people in the past. We need to understand history. History means that we understand how people lived in the past and get to our best of understanding. but the way we are going to live in the present might be very different, and that is okay. So my point is that in many of these issues, we need to take seriously the questions of science, that we are living in a world of a very different cosmos. We have a new story of human origins. We have a new idea of self and selfhood, and that crisis of knowledge that informs Muslim practice, that crisis of knowledge must be remedied. What I'm saying is that often in this question of knowledge that Muslims have, when it comes to knowledge of religion, only the past matters. Contemporary knowledge does not gel with that past. We're not creating a new narrative for Muslims in the present. In other words, all the experiences of human beings in the last 300 years, from scientific to social scientific knowledge, Muslim traditional scholarship puts that aside and says, actually, we cannot touch that because that comes from a Western and non-Islamic origin. That is the nub of the question. You go to any of your mosques in this town, in this city, and talk to any theologian about thinking about the questions of philosophy, of Kant, or the understandings by Mill, and they would say, we cannot entertain that. Very few will be courageous enough to even know to say that we don't know. Very few will be courageous enough to say we don't know what it is. And the question is that the other trends in Islamic thought that we have are those that are of the revivalist kind, that is also prevalent in this part of the world, and that is that those who are saying all the answers lie in the Quran and Sunnah. And there is no interpretive filter to understand the Quran and Sunnah. It's a very kind of straightforward understanding of it, no understanding of where the Quran and the Sunnah was and how it was made in the past, what the past, the importance of history in that. They just want to read it off and say, this makes you an authentic Muslim. That is also lacking. So what you need is an apparatus to understand Islam. Islam always was, and the beauty of Islamic traditionalism was, that it had a complex, once upon a time, it had a complex apparatus of interpretation. What has happened is that even Muslim traditionalists have now lost that literacy of complexity. And it become now that Muslim traditionalists are now doing the same thing that Islamic revivalists are doing, Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat Islami kind of types, that is basically reading the Quran straight from the pages and giving straightforward interpretations, and no longer putting it through an interpretive filter the way it was in the past. In fact, they think that interpretation is inauthentic, whereas in the past, interpretation was part of the authenticity. The one issue, for instance, that you would have is that the political theology that Muslims have inherited in the 21st century is a political theology of empire. A political theology of empire, in other words, is a political thinking. It's imperial, also thinks in hierarchical ways. And the best example I can give you is during the Arab Spring, two important Arab thinkers were arguing about what happened in Egypt when Morsi was overthrown by Sisi. In Qatar, there was Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who said that Sisi should be seen as an outlaw and a rebel because he overthrew a legitimate imam, a legitimate political leader. Imam means a political leader. And Sheikh Ali Juma, who was a former mufti of Egypt, a pro-Sisi individual, he said that an imam who has been deposed has no legitimacy. When I thought about this, I said, what language are both these individuals talking about? They're talking in an 11th century political theology of caliphate. And last I checked was that Morsi, God bless his soul, he's dead since he died in prison, that Morsi signed up to be the president of Egypt. There was a constitution, there were rules of the game. But why are these individuals who are the legitimators of Morsi and the delegitimators of Sisi, or the legitimators of Sisi and delegitimators of Morsi, why are they talking in this language? Because this is the only language they know. This is the language that Muslim Orthodoxy knows. And they have not updated their political theology. I mean, if you are studying Maududi or Sayyid Qutb or any of those people, the 2-3 big issues all of them talk about is that what we're going to do with them is we're non-Muslims, and non-Muslims can never be the head of the state. And the other thing that they're going to say is that, Islam has to be the supreme religion of the country. Right? Those are the things, and that scares the wits out of minorities in many Muslim majority societies. But also individuals on this side of the world, they read these texts and they think these are the only kinds of political theologies that are available, and they would say to you that democracy is actually antithetical to Islam. And my time is up. That democracy is antithetical to Islam, and that I remember this very well in 1994 when we had our first election in South Africa, under Nelson Mandela, and some of the youngsters at the university who read these kind of materials who said that, the Quran is our constitution. I said, where did you learn this? Well, I should have known, because the Quran is the constitution is a slogan that the Muslim Brotherhood talked about. Al-Islamu, Al-Quranu Dasturuna. The Quran is our constitution, but that is a metaphorical understanding of the Quran as a constitution, right? I tend to remind this young individual and several of them that the Prophet Muhammad, when he was in Medina, he basically authored a document of the rules and the regulations between the different parties. That's the proper constitution. The Quran as a constitution is a more metaphorical. You shouldn't take it literally. But people do still believe today that democracy is not an acceptable system. Now, if you have another system, please bring that forward. There's nothing that's written in heaven that democracy is the only system, of course. But it is something that human beings have experimented with, and we can do that. So part of this is the absence of literacy, not only among the Muslim masses, but also among the elites. The elites are the biggest problem in Muslim society. If you talk to any well-qualified Muslim from a good university who's got marginal literacy in Islam, if you talk any level of complexity about Islam to you, they switch off. They want a simplistic Islam that will get them from here straight into heaven. And what that often means is that once you hit age 45, 50, well, first Umrah, you go for the minor pilgrimage, second Umrah, another minor pilgrimage, then the Hajj, then the wife starts bailing, then you're trying to say, okay, right now we're getting better and we want to go, we're ready now. Now they cut themselves off from every part of society, they only mix amongst themselves, and that is now ready for the afterworld. It should just be the opposite. You need to become more engaged with the society. You do not need to become isolated. But these are the challenges that we have. And that is because the problem is not necessarily the mullah in East London or in West London sitting in the mosque. It's also your elite, secular educated leadership who are seeking accreditation and acceptance by being the most orthodox they can. Because, when their mother dies, they want to, when you sit with them, Rabia, just give me two more minutes. When you sit with them in their drawing rooms and have conversation, they say, wow, we really like what you're saying about progressive Islam and all this kind of stuff. But the moment you ask them, okay, what kind of investment are you prepared to make in institutions that's going to advance this cause, they start scratching their heads and they start saying, you know what, man, the Internal Revenue Service this year hit me so hard that, my tax burden is so big, I can't really give you this year. 10 minutes later, a cleric will come in with all the proper paraphernalia, long beard, turban, all this kind of stuff, and say, sir, we just got a mosque built right now. The mosque is almost done. What we need is 100,000 pounds to fit in the carpets. And you know what's going to happen? You remember your late mother and your late father, they gave you a good education, you're a very rich man today. Every time someone's going to pray on that carpet in the mosque, you and generations of your children are going to get reward, and your mother and the father. It cuts that check just like that. When I came to him and said, sponsored 2 students at University of London or at Oxford or University of Cape Town to do advanced studies in Islamic studies, he would find all kinds of excuses. This is the problem. The problem is not necessarily because who enables the orthodox people? Who funds them? Are the people who are making a lot of money. So what you really need to do is you need to target the elites and bring some sense to them, because they are the enablers in one way or the other, and we can talk more about that. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.